It's another Monday, and lately I've been thinking a lot about how my content has been up until this point. I think that it's a lot of stream of consciousness, which is fine, but I want to start to explore a little bit more about giving solutions rather than maybe just starting conversations and, pondering certain things, or, for lack of a better word, maybe complaining about certain things that I've been struggling with. I do think when I first started making videos more consciously and more regularly, part of the point was just to get thoughts out and maybe not necessarily stopping myself by having to have a specific motivation or a specific message to impart. I think starting discussions is really important in and of itself. So I've been okay with that up until this point, but I'm definitely thinking about what it looks like to continue to make content and have it add some kind of value to the conversations that I'm bringing up here. Today, I wanted to talk a bit about nostalgia and a little bit about how that maybe relates to a couple of the past topics I've discussed and sort of like my particular qualms with them. I would say I'm probably the world's biggest victim of nostalgia. I really put the alga in the nostalgia. For anyone that doesn't know, that part of the word does mean pain. So it's like a pain that I feel very acutely, very consistently, and very, very often in my life. So that kind of yearning for how things felt in the past and how things don't feel that way now. And, looking back on things with rose-colored glasses, definitely. But I do feel like there's just something of the before times that I think is missing now. I think there's been a lot of commentary on this too, from a sociological and like economic level. I've heard it be called the enshittification of things too. And of course, we've all heard the term late stage capitalism and all that good stuff. So I think all of those things are related. I also think growing up is a part of that feeling too, and just like having time go by. It's just like a victim of itself, But I would say it's probably one of my biggest sadnesses and most like persistent ones. That's just sort of, I carry it all the time in some way. And one of the most recent iterations of that for me was I went back to some Disney parks recently. I grew up going to them. I grew up in South Florida. And I know that there's the whole, when you're a kid, everything feels more magical, and those spaces are definitely catered to kids. Like that's the target audience. I understand this. But I think that even as a kiddo, I felt like I could notice when, the facade was a little bit cracking, or like you could see the seams, in the experience. And when I went back most recently, I was definitely feeling it really heavy, and, especially with the rise in the prices of things and how tough that is as well to sort of negotiate like the value of that versus like what you're getting now for what you're paying, is really difficult. And I think, again, a lot of these things are sort of part and parcel of growing up and like paying your own stuff and whatever, and just sort of like seeing the world from a different perspective, not a child's mind anymore. But I just wonder at what point, like, at least for me, continuing to go to places like that or go to have experiences like that is really just like based off the nostalgia factor of like I'm chasing that high that I feel like I used to get pretty consistently from like going to these things and participating in these things. And I don't really know what the answer to that is, and maybe it's just that times have changed and, folks aren't investing as much into making these experiences as great as they were, or as, holistic as they were, to such a high standard as maybe in the past. Because times are tough. I think that everyone is feeling it, and it is getting difficult as a consumer to not feel totally railed by a lot of the decisions being made by companies, specifically as it relates to their costs and how everything is like a subscription model, or like 8 billion times more expensive than it used to be. And you really sit back to think about like, what are you really getting for what you're spending? And it doesn't feel like it's very worth it. So I wonder if maybe it's creating more space for new things to kind of take up that place. But something I really appreciated about theme parks growing up was that it really did feel like somewhere that you could escape to, but was still real life, right? I think we have a lot of these spaces online, but something I mentioned in a couple of past videos is like, I don't know that it's entirely helpful or maybe the right direction to go in to live our lives fully like in this sort of like second reality, which is the internet. Like I've discussed what my qualms about making content are too, and they sort of touch on that. Like I'd rather be having this discussion with someone in front of me or a group of people. But alas, this is the world we live in, and if to a certain degree we don't get with the program, you kind of get left out of the conversation. So I'm hoping that what all of this kind of culminates in is the opportunity for new spaces and reimaginings of these things, like maybe the era of Disney theme parks and things like that in that particular iteration has come and gone, and that can be okay. But I think it will be interesting to see what maybe takes up its spot in the real world, not just online, because I'm getting really exhausted of looking at screens and seeing notifications and pings and whatever. So I'm wondering if this rings true to anyone, or if anyone has I guess like thoughts on what they think might take up this spot. I think a lot about like beloved old theme parks, like smaller local things in different states here in the United States, or really anywhere, I guess, and how so many of them have fallen into like, you know, disrepair and have been abandoned, and or just like never fixed up after some kind of economic downturn or natural disaster. I'm thinking about the theme park that was in Louisiana after Katrina that just never got fixed, and just all these sorts of different things that are really beloved by a community, but just kind of like fall off the map, if you will. And I'm wondering what thoughts and ideas maybe folks have noodled around with insofar as what could take that place, or like if it's really worth just reimagining what those spaces can look like still being things like theme parks or things like that. If you grew up in South Florida, you probably remember something called Wanna-Do City. This was kind of like, it was in a mall, but it was like this little world for kids that you just walk in. It's like a little city, as the name would suggest, and you could do anything you wanted to do, which is like, it was sort of a simulation for capitalism, which is a little odd. Like you would have a job and stuff, and like, you know, there was jail and like a bunch of weird stuff. But my point here is that it was a different experience that you could really interact with like in real time, and didn't have to be like that serious, and it wasn't like truly the real world. So a lot more interactive than what I see like interactive exhibits and immersive exhibits be like in the adult world now, which is just like a projector with lights. Clearly I'm not a fan of that, and I have my thoughts about that too. But I feel like I grew up with so many different iterations of this idea of like, not an escapist fantasy, but something that, you know, helped you kind of step out of your own life and still be in reality, I think was really interesting and helpful in such a way that like still kept a part of your brain on and like open in a way that I feel like maybe consuming content sometimes numbs a part of your brain, since you're like consuming instead of really interacting. And I think that's part of why I don't necessarily just want to like talk at someone who's watching this and just be like, here's how I solved this, or here's what I do about this. It's like, I think there's like a time and place for that stuff, and I've found it really valuable in my own life over the years, but I also feel like it's not really a conversation, and I would like to have conversations here. So anyway, I suppose to wrap up, nostalgia is a bitch, and it weighs on me really heavily. I think my TikTok algorithm knows that as well. It pushes a lot of like early 2000s compilations with like, you know, really nostalgic background music or whatever, and I feel each of those like so very viscerally in my soul. And I think that while it is nice to remember certain things and like miss them and have them have meant something to you, I do think it's a trap to like fall into like too far into that sentiment and kind of get stuck there. I think it is very easy for me to forget that I will look back on this time that way, no matter what I'm doing now, whether or not things are of high quality or whatever. Like, I will have nostalgia for this moment too. And so trying to like get ahead of that feeling and make sure that I'm actually enjoying what I'm up to now, instead of like waiting for the nostalgia train to come hit me in about 5 or 10 years too. So I'm really interested to know what your experience with this has been, or if you've never thought about that. I was talking to someone recently who just like doesn't really get affected by nostalgia, and I couldn't imagine what that is like, because I am always hurt by that, I would say. So thanks for spending time with me again. I will see you again next week.